that sentence there by blessed, because it's like, what is the idea of looking like it has its you know what together? Like, what is the idea? Like who are you presenting yourself for? Is it the American people, or is it the Democratic leadership? Because they're two different things. I think really the only audience in this situation should be the American people. You're making a case to the American people. You're making a case more specifically, I think, to the Democratic base that really Nancy Pelosi is in large parts accountable to. I mean, Nancy Pelosi is also, by the way, accountable to her, Big Pharma, and all the people that donate to her campaign to ensure she won't fight for things like Medicare for all, but you're not going to be able to convince them. What you really should do, I think, is you don't worry about, what the Democratic leadership says. And this is not just going to come from AOC, this is going to come from organizations like Justice Democrats, like DSA. You're going to have to go to the people in the Democratic base and be like, hey, and also, by the way, people maybe even outside the Democratic base, to be like, hey, we need this bill, and we need to pressure Nancy Pelosi to do it. In whatever way that takes, whatever possible form that takes, because again, here's the thing, Nancy Pelosi is, as annoying as I find it, relatively popular within the Democratic Party. Although a lot of Americans do think she should not be reelected speaker. But really, that is a very, very tricky situation, very tricky waters to navigate. But I really think you don't, walking up to Nancy Pelosi and being like, if you do this for me, will you give me Medicare for all? That is a dead-end way of looking at things. It's counterproductive, and it's not the direction that the left needs to be focusing its energy to. It's not about convincing 80-year-old, decrepit, leaders of the Democratic Party, like people like Steny Hoyer, Nancy Pelosi, Jim Clyburn, and all those people, to support Medicare for all. But you need to convince the Democratic base, because if the Democratic base is convinced in large enough numbers, there's not going to be a lot people like Pelosi can do. There really isn't, because if you have groundswell support, if you have a fever pitch of groundswell support, that's how change is really made. And I think, and a reason why, especially after listening to the Force of the Vote people a little bit more, in specific, a great podcast with Kaya Kalinske of Secular Talk. He's a YouTuber. Justin Jackson, the NFL player and running back on the Chargers, who is pro Force of the Vote. And I believe Brianna Joy Gray. It was Brianna Joy Gray's podcast. And it was a really big benefit and a really big step towards raising that public profile, getting people to be like, hey, this is a really big issue. Why isn't Nancy Pelosi? I thought they liked me. I thought they wanted me to have health care. Why are they supporting this? This seems like a good thing. When that question starts to raise in especially Democratic voters' minds, that's when I think you're getting somewhere. It's definitely not to go up to Nancy Pelosi and try and convince her. You shouldn't be convincing Nancy Pelosi. So first, let's look at the arguments for a floor vote. This is, again, Blessed writing here. Writing in Current Affairs last week, Gray pointed out the recent bill to decriminalize cannabis and argued that a floor vote on the bill would effectively relaunch the national dialogue about single-payer at a time when it's never been more necessary to do so. I think that's, a pretty fair point. If you got AOC and people like that being aggressive, and again, I kind of went back and forth, but I'm now kind of more to this side that to a certain extent, if you got people like AOC out there really pushing this, really pushing this in the media, on Twitter, everywhere, people like AOC, they know how to get attention. Well, AOC especially knows how to get attention. But if you got a full push from people like Jamal Bowman, Ilhan Omar, all those people getting out in public and saying, why isn't this happening? It'll definitely relaunch the conversation. So, again, this is from Current Affairs, Brianna Joy Gray. Just a week ago, the passage of the House bill decriminalizing marijuana was covered widely as historic, perhaps because, like Medicare for All, it's an enormously popular policy with bipartisan support. It's also unlikely to pass the Senate, and that was without the added drama of the most powerful Democrat in the House being bent over the proverbial barrel by a squad of progressive upstarts. Gray is absolutely right that if the left wing of the caucus wants its votes not to be taken for granted in the next 2 years, a show of force that they can bend Pelosi to their will is important. That is the step that we are missing from people like AOC and the rest of the members of the squad. actually getting out there and putting themselves in an open confrontation with Nancy Pelosi. That is a very rare thing. The last time I could think that she's done it has been her first day when she was out there with the Sunrise Movement in the sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office. While Ocasio-Cortez has argued that the left could use its leverage in the speaker vote in more effective ways, pretty much all the attempts at using leverage have not worked so far. The progressives didn't put an alternative when they had a chance to do so during the caucus vote, so the only alternative to Pelosi is QAnon-friendly Republican Kevin McCarthy. Progressives, including Ocasio-Cortez, and by the way, again, the speakership is a little bit different from just saying that, the House, the Democrats still have more votes in the House. So, again, having Kevin McCarthy being speaker is a very bad thing. It's a very bad thing. But you do have to realize, the Democrats still control the House. That is that factor as well. So, progressives, including Ocasio-Cortez, were locked out of the most powerful congressional committees again. Ocasio-Cortez was allegedly snubbed from the Energy and Commerce Committee because of her Pelosi criticism, but multiple reports have made it clear she was also punished for supporting primary challenges to other Democrats, including Republican endorsing Representative Henry Cuellar, which that is not something that she should have backed down from. That is completely the right move. Alex Salmon's recent American Prospect report on the obscure steering committee vote that led to Ocasio-Cortez's exclusion is required reading for anyone who wants to understand how the Democratic center wields power to try and force the left to fall in line. And to her credit, Ocasio-Cortez has doubled down, and that's exactly what she should be doing. Yeah. And a really kind of a nice tweet from Jessica Cisneros, the Democrat that she supported that got him into that got AOC into so much hot water. She challenged the awful Democratic representatives, pretty much a Democrat name, only supported by the Kochs, Republican endorser. But still, there's a mafia-like loyalty cult inside the Democratic Party, and supporting any other people outside the family gets you a huge look in the negative direction. So, this guy, Henry Cuellar, who AOC endorsed the primary challenger of, the wonderful Jessica Cisneros, by the way, hope she runs again. By the way, also Elizabeth Warren endorsed her as well. In the U.S. House, Democrat Henry Cuellar raises eyebrows for fundraising for Republican John Carter. Again, against a very, very possible pickup at the time. This was in 2018. And she writes, Jessica Cisneros writes, at least AOC supports other Democrats. So, great little shot there. And AOC writes, I just want to know that supporting you was 100% worth it. If calling out anti-choice policies and holding institutions accountable for blocking working class women like you is a source of political retribution, I'm okay with that. You're amazing and I'm proud of you. Keep shining. Really, really cool stuff there. And exactly the right thing to do. But yeah, so it is exactly 100,000 trillion% the right thing to do. So it's also clear that kind of using leverage some of the ideas of using leverage that she put out there are a bit stale. In addition to talking about elevating longtime progressive champions to leadership just days before she got shanked by the right in the E&C vote, Energy and Commerce Committee vote, Ocasio-Cortez recently floated a $15 minimum wage in the first 100 days, which isn't exactly up to the House, as they already passed it in Congress and it wasn't taken up by the Senate. If they win the Senate in Georgia runoffs next month, pretty much Joe Manchin is going to be the one deciding the fate of a $15 minimum wage. Any leverage would be really pure symbolism at this point, but symbolism is important, especially when progressives want to show they're not the junior partners in a coalition, but rather an independent, influential force in American politics. Super, super important. What doesn't help, and in fact might hurt, is a crushing defeat for Medicare for All, which really would be a very real possibility if this vote were to be held in Biden's first 100 days. Gray sets the issues of marijuana decriminalization, but unlike Medicare for All, that was supported by nearly everyone in the Democratic caucus and even a few Republicans. Medicare for All was only co-sponsored by half the Democratic caucus in this Congress. In the next one, there will be a Democratic president who explicitly opposes Medicare for All and has promised to veto it. If every single co-sponsor voted for it, and everyone who isn't co-sponsoring it voted against it, it would still be defeated by just under 200 votes. But that's unfortunately an optimistic estimate. Again, here's the other thing. If that bill, if you look at that and see it has no chance of passing, you're honestly more likely to vote for it because it's going to be dead anyway in the Senate. But coming in with this expectation that allowing a floor vote is like the right thing to do, I mean, and it's still allowing a floor vote that's very, very likely to fail anyway, it still provides the opportunity for progressives to get out there and make a case, drive the national conversation, be in the media supporting and really like calling out other Democrats for not supporting Medicare for All and making people aware to the situation, which I think is really quite powerful. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Cory Booker, and Representative Tim Ryan have all really been co-sponsors of Medicare for All, either in this Congress or the last one. The first three released their own health care plans that aren't Medicare for All. They were just called that. And after putting his name on this year's Medicare for All bill as an original co-sponsor in this past February, just 5 months later, Tim Ryan took the stage and really, in the debate, like really the only time that America's really going to ever see him, and he used it to argue that single payer would be bad for unions, because apparently unions should like having more things to negotiate for in contracts. In addition, this sets the expectation that House Democrats would begin their agenda in the next Congress by embracing a healthcare policy that which their own incoming president would not only explicitly rejected, but heavily implied he would veto if it were to hit his desk. That would never happen. If you think the Republican Party's kid gloves treatment of Trump was bad, the way most congressional Democrats handle Biden will not look much different. There's no obligation for anyone to consider what an embrace of Medicare for All would do to Joe Biden's political capital to be a real reason for voting against it, but most mainstream Democrats are not itching for that fight with the leaders of their own party right now, not least because they know it would ultimately fail once it hits the Senate. This is only move you pull when you know you have a good chance of winning that fight. The floor vote supporters argue it's ultimately more important to push the issue now, since even if the vote fails miserably, it'll force both squishy co-sponsors and opponents of Medicare for All to commit to a vote on the record, and that would pretty much expose some of the no votes and people who may not be quite there. Again, I think what the answer to this is, again, we go back and forth on this issue, and there's definitely some really convincing and some compelling points raised on both sides here. But I think at the end of the day, what you have to look at is the likelihood of, like, how does this get passed? You need to have groundswell of support from all the right people, because you're not going to do it through electoral politics. You just won't. Like, the change really very rarely, especially in a large way like what Medicare for All truly really is, it does not happen through just being like, oh yeah, we'll lobby a few representatives really hard. No, it's so that people are like banging down the doors of the office of the representatives to be like, you gotta pass this, you gotta pass this, you gotta pass this, and now, like, it's really that important. You gotta pass this, and that doesn't quite happen with just a floor vote. So really, what you can do is, like, a floor vote's a good step. I think it's probably. I mean, I think really the question is, you won't really know until you try it what effect a very likely failed floor vote will have on the overall impact of Medicare for All. But what you definitely will see is it going into the national conversation a lot more than it already has, which I think is very important. But what benefit will that? What effect will that have is the real question. And then something I really think I haven't quite resolved in my own head. Would love to hear what you think about this. You can leave a comment on Spreaker.com/TSWS if you're listening on Spreaker platforms, or hit me up on Twitter at SBW272. And also, by the way, while you're there, or if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify, give us a nice rate, review, comment, interact. That's pretty much what I'm trying to say. You know how to be online. You know how to interact with your favorite content. So I trust that you guys will be able to get that done. So thank you so much for listening. Really do appreciate it. We will be back around Thursday with some more end of the year content for some fun.